My guest today is a very special one to me, which is Janet Wong. And I met Janet from a very early age because she is my cousin. She's the only cousin that I have on my dad's side. And we grew up going to get together for food from time to time. Remember many memorable dim sum feasts, and we've been kind of in and out of each other's lives as we become adults. And I thought of Janet to feature on Coherence podcast because she had a very memorable story of starting out her career as a lawyer and then deciding to make a pretty big pivot, leave her lawyering behind after all of that schooling, after legal school debt, and just decided to follow her curiosity and her original passion, which was for a more artistic path. And so she has formed a very illustrious career as a children's book author and poet. And she's also written some books for teens. She's published 38 books and counting. And she's just someone who, when you talk to her, she's so good at telling stories. She's so good at telling, like taking a little element of something that happened and making it relatable. And I think I've always been struck by her simple language that I think works really well with children, but kind of maybe true of a lot of poets, that there's a lot of wisdom behind there. There's a lot of empathy at these very universal human feelings that we experience ever since childhood. So today we talk about the different pinpoints and milestones along the way in her path, a little bit about the tenacity that it takes to really make it in get your work published, and how she thinks about like models in our families when thinking about how to gain inspiration. So I think it's a sweet conversation. I'm excited to share it with you. Thanks for being here, and here we go.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that it's so easy to learn something new.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a lover of learning.
Yeah, I am.
Well, I'm really excited for today for many reasons. I think, um, you are someone who in the past few years you have really up in my life as like a keeper of our family's stories and a willingness to share, things from the past that I haven't always been privy to. And so as much as you are sort of a beautiful holder and share of these like family stories from our family, I realized that I haven't really got to sit down and like really hear your story from you. And we have only limited time today, so I'm sure we could spend a whole day recounting, but I think I'm excited to just, get to know you better. I guess kind of starting with the where you are now, and then we'll backtrack. So if you were just kind of like at the pickleball court and meeting someone new and they said, "Hey, Janet, yeah, so what do you do where do you spend your time? What do you do?" How would you answer that question?
How would I answer that question? Pickleball all the time.
I know, I had to situate you in your common context.
Actually, the newest book, let me see where it is. The newest book, Clara's Cookie Compendium of Thimble Thoughts and Wonder Fuzz. I'm sure you have not seen this.
I have
But anyway,
not.
for each of our books, Sylvia and I try to do something a little bit fun in our bio, right? And so we have the standard bio, and then we add just a few lines of something totally frivolous that gives you a glimpse into who we are. And so my bio says, Janet Wong is a graduate of Yale Law School and a former lawyer. She has written more than 40 books for children on a wide variety of subjects, including chess, Alex and the Wednesday Chess Club, and yoga, twist, yoga poems. She is the 2021 winner of the NCT Excellence in Poetry for Children Award, a Lifetime Achievement Award that is one of the highest honors a children's poet can receive. Janet's favorite thing to do and watch and talk about is pickleball. Working on this book made her skip playing about 2,673 pickleball games. But immediately upon finishing this book, she jumped right back into it to make up all that lost time. Learn about Janet at Janet Wong, Janet-Wong.com. And yep,
Awesome. I love that.
pickleball is my life with a little bit of work thrown in, which just makes pickleball more fun because, I have it as my break from work.
Yeah, you're dedicated. Did you actually do the math? Is it truly that many games that you missed?
It's probably more than
Yeah.
that, but I just
Yeah.
thought that was
Wow.
a really nice number, so I put it in.
Well, I think it shows your commitment to writing, to be willing to sit out on those games and, sit down to the rating test. But I think that's so great. Like as a coach, I'm helping people write their bios all the time. And it's really sweet to just kind of hear all of the very impressive things that you've done. And then that just like very real and humanizing reality of like your big commitment and passion right now in pickleball.
I think actually that what you just said is one of the
Hmm.
things that it took me 30 years to learn. When I started out, I was so worried about being professional, and serious and not frivolous, not not discounting myself in any way. And now I kind of feel like, you know what? I'm going to let you know who I am. I am going to be serious, but I'm also going to be myself and include all the weird, quirky, strange, funny, oddball things because if you don't like it, maybe I don't want to work with you. So
Yes.
I've become a lot more accepting of myself and in a strange way, demanding of others because we have so little time. There are so many ways that we can spend our time, so many different paths we can take. Why waste it on people who are going to drag you down? So,
Hmm. I
so
love that.
putting that little bit of pickleball in there was truly authentic. That really is who I
Yes.
am today. All about the work and play and presenting myself as it's the whole package.
Yes. Yes. I appreciate that behind the scenes look at that choice. I was curious because I noticed that your bio, the formal, written one, and said it starts out with you being a lawyer. And I think that's a choice, right? To kind of start there with your first kind of main profession. What do you think? I'm going to get back to your mom as an artist, but what do you think as a storyteller compelling about starting there?
Well, actually, I usually don't tell kids the preamble. Let me share the preamble with you. So,
Yeah.
I was a senior at UCLA, a history major, and it was fall quarter. And my father said, okay, we need to sit down and talk. And I thought, oh no, what do we need to sit down and talk about? And so I remember very vividly sitting down at the dining table and he said, okay, you're a senior. You're going to be graduating. What are you going to do next year? And if I had had the courage, I might have said, I think I want to be an artist. I think I want to be a painter. But if I had said that, he would have said, you know what? You could start with the bathroom. Go go and grab a gallon of paint, get enamel or semi-gloss and start with the bathroom because that's the kind of painting that we were allowed to do in our family, right? So I had done a junior year abroad in France. And because I wanted to travel throughout the week, I bought an Interrail pass and I said, I'm going to take classes that are on Tuesday and Wednesday. And that way I can travel from Thursday until Monday every weekend. If I want, I can go somewhere else. And so I was at the University of Bordeaux for that year, but I was really traveling all over the place, all over France and Italy and Spain. And, um, and I was discovering on my travels art and the classes that I took that were available on Tuesday and Wednesday happened to be art history classes. And I was a history major, not an art history major. So this was totally new for me. Art history, I was doing intensive art history on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. and then seeing art out in the world on Thursday, Friday,
Hmm.
Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And when I came back, and I actually taught myself how to paint. And when I came back, I kept painting, and they were terrible, terrible paintings, but I just had so much fun, and I had fun. Um, and I was proud, so proud of it, that I wore those clothes with the little bits of paint on them all the time, everywhere.
Hmm.
So people would say, "Oh, you have paint on your pants," and I'd say, "Yeah, I'm a painter." But then I
Wait, I
didn't
want to
want to
jump
tell.
in there. So, because you
Yeah,
said your family didn't really encourage your, artistic side, but there was pride there. What do you think was making you proud at
proud of
that
being a paint.
age?
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's because I had that very intensive art year in France, and
Mhm.
um and when we look at our families and we say to ourselves, we're a little different from them. How did that happen? I think
Mm.
very often it's because of really just like one decision that we made. And for me, that decision was, I think I want to travel and live in France. And that
Mhm.
was just a huge life changing experience. But so anyway, when my father said we need to talk, and he said, "What are you going to do next year?" And I said, "Oh," and I thought to myself, I don't want to tell him I want to be a painter. I just said, "Oh, I don't know." And then he said, "Well, I think you could be a good lawyer. Maybe you should go to law school." And I said, I think that there are too many lawyers and I'm not really interested in that, but maybe if I apply and I get into a good law school, I'll go. And then I got into Yale, so I had to go. But already by week 6, I
Mm.
knew that the law was not for me. And I
Mm.
went to my small group professor, Stephen Carter. At Yale Law, you have one small group with just like 15 people in it, and then you have a few large classes. And I went to him at the end of week 6, and I said, this was on Friday, and I said, just out of courtesy, because I respect you so much, I just want to let you know I'm going to be dropping out on Monday. And he said nonchalantly, "Oh, what will you be doing?" And I said, "I'm going to become a potter in New Mexico." And he said, "New Mexico, have you ever been to New Mexico?" And I said, "Yes, I drove through New Mexico on the way here from California to New Haven. I drove through New Mexico. I really like it." And he said, "Pottery. Do you do pottery?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been doing pottery for 6 weeks. Right before, school started, I signed up for a class at the New Haven Art Center, and I've been doing pottery for 6 weeks." And he said, "You know, you just wrote the best memo in your class. Maybe you should graduate and then become a potter in New Mexico."
Mm. Mm.
And I thought, wow, I just wrote the best memo in the class. And I remember logging through that memo and just putting something down and saying to myself, gosh, look at them. They are so into it. My classmates, they are so into it. I
Mm.
will never be like them. I don't belong here. But then I thought, well, maybe I don't need to be like them. Maybe I could take my own approach, not do too much work, do a little bit of art on the side, and still graduate. And so I did. I graduated with a lot of student loans, and it took 4 years to pay the student loans back. But in my last job, my last legal job, I was director of labor relations at Universal Studios Hollywood. And it was my job to help negotiate 9 different union contracts and, when required, to fire people. And I was firing
Mm.
on average 10 people a week, or at least it
Yeah.
felt like that. And so one night I said to my husband, Glenn, I said, I think I'm becoming a mean person. And he
Mm.
said, yeah, you are. And I thought, oh
So,
no, I don't want to be a mean person. I want to be, that artist, that painter. And I
hmm,
didn't know what I really wanted to be. But I said to myself, I think I want to do something really important with my life. I want to do something good. And I couldn't think of anything better than working with kids. But
Hmm.
I had
let
been
me
a
jump in here,
substitute.
Janet.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Were you, after you graduated from law school, continuing to do pottery on the side? Were you able to sustain sort of a side art practice? Or did you feel like the corporate job kind of gobbled up the time and energy and you had to kind of put that on pause?
The corporate jobs pretty much gobbled up the time and energy. I
Yeah.
did manage to take I managed to take a children's picture book class, just a little, I think it was only like a 6-week class at UCLA Extension, but I think I did that actually the summer before I started working as a lawyer. I think that I did that the summer between having graduated and working as a lawyer. And it was just kind of a, random idea. It wasn't anything that I thought very much about. And I usually don't talk about it, although the fact that I chose a children's picture book class really is telling. And
Yeah.
the teacher of that class, Ruth Lercher Bornstein, the author and illustrator of Little Gorilla and many other books, was so incredibly
Oh, we
encouraging.
just got that book for my daughter. Yeah,
That's
that's great.
that's Ruth's classic book,
Hmm.
Little Gorilla.
Wow.
And he grew and he grew. Yeah. And it
Oh,
addresses
nice.
all that anxiety that children have about being
Hmm.
the center of attention and loved by everyone because they're
Hmm.
so little and cute. And then that feeling of, well, I wonder if they'll always love me, right? Even when
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Hmm.
little and cute anymore. It really is a classic. And so I studied for 6 weeks with Ruth. I haven't, which is why these interviews are so great because you think of little things and think, wow, I wonder how much of a role that played. But but pretty much I didn't do much in the way of art at all. So
Yeah.
when I later decided that I wanted to do something important in my life and it should be something that had something to do with kids, I had kind of forgotten that I'd done that little 6-week class.
Right.
And
But so what was it around? Because I work with clients all the time where they might know that they have a desire to do something great, but
yeah.
sometimes I meet them at the point where they are really not sure what that is. And they're trying to, um, do the detective work, this sort of self-investigation to figure out, well, but what could be what's the heart or the seed of that thing? And I know you kind of almost telling us that you realized it had to do with kids, but can you go back in your memory and think like what that progression of realization was like? Was it like a aha moment, or how did you put that together?
Well, the thought that I wanted to do something with kids actually preceded the big aha moment. So the thought that I wanted to do something with kids really is consistent with some of my interests earlier. So one day when I was at Yale Law School and a bunch of us were standing around complaining about how poor we were, and we were just, it was just a little pity party, and we were just, oh, I'm so poor, we can't do anything. One of our favorite professors walked by and he said, "What's the matter? What's the problem? What's the problem here?" Because he could tell we were all bummed, and and so we started complaining. Oh, we don't have any money. We're so poor. We can't do anything. And he said, go and sign up at the local school district. Sign up to be a substitute teacher. You all have university degrees. Go and sign up to be a substitute teacher. They call you that morning. You look at your schedule. You decide,
Mm,
can you do it or can you not do it? If you
mm,
can do it, you go and you're a substitute teacher for the day and you make some money. So it's that easy. So we all marched down to the school district office and signed up. And I soon discovered that being a teacher is the very hardest job. And I knew I would not survive as a teacher, but I loved working with kids. And so that kind of made me think about,
mm,
later on, think, oh, I want to do something important with my life. Well, working with kids would be fulfilling that. But I knew I wouldn't be a
mm,
teacher. I knew I couldn't survive
mm-hmm.
as a teacher. And you were a kid, and it was your birthday coming up. And I don't know if you know this, I went to a little teeny tiny bookstore to
Hmm.
buy a present for you. I was going to buy one book for you. And then the
Hmm.
next thing I knew, I had an armload of books for
Hmm.
you that I wanted to
Hmm.
buy for myself. And the idea hit me. Somebody wrote these books. Why couldn't
Hmm.
I be one of those people? And I didn't know anything about how to get published. Well, I had learned a little teeny tiny bit from Ruth Bornstein, but I really didn't understand the enormity of the process of getting published. But I knew that if I went to the library, if I immersed myself in that, I could figure it out. And so
Hmm.
I came home and I said to Glenn, you know, I want to do this for a year. I want to write books for a year. And if I can sell a book, then I'll keep on going. And if I can't sell a book, then I'll go back to being a lawyer. And lucky for me, Glenn is more realistic than I. And he said, why don't you do this for a year? And if you love it, then keep doing it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I thought, oh, I'll sell a book within a year. But then at the end of the year, I had a stack of rejection letters and I felt so dejected. I almost picked up that phone and called my old boss to say I would be coming back. But then I remembered what Glenn had said, and I did love writing. I
Hmm.
do love writing. I love the way that when you write, you can get so lost in the little world that you're creating on the page. You get so
Hmm.
lost in it that time just flies by. I love the way that you can create your own world and make it just the way you want. I love the way you can take the worst thing that happened to you last week and change the ending, right?
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
I kept on writing, and 6 months
Hmm.
past my own deadline, a year and a half after I got started, my first book, Good Luck Gold, was sold.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
you
Wait, let me.
actually were the impetus,
I'm going to
little
take some
Melissa.
credit for this. No, good
Yeah.
thing I had a birthday. No, that's so cool. I didn't know that. Wow. I mean, I love that story for many reasons. One, like mantra of sorts that I saw on, I think maybe your old website, was this idea of why not me? And it comes to mind because I think, sometimes I've been guilty of this often, where I go to like a big bookstore and I'm like, oh, if I ever had a whiff of a dream of writing a book someday, I'm like, look at all these books. Like, how could I even possibly, I had that same perspective about podcasts for a while. I was like, oh, I'm late to the game. There's so many podcasts out there. Why does the world need my podcast? Right. And I love that from the sound of it, that stack of book was like encouraging. It's like, well, other people wrote this book, so I can do it too. I guess, does that strike you as like a character trait of yours, to be kind of like have that belief in your capabilities or a certain tenacity? Like, what does that moment, do you think, say about who you are?
Well, you talked earlier about the creativity and our family and where did it come from? And I was talking about, just that decision I had made that I wanted to be able to go to France. And actually there's a lot of gumption and creativity in our family. And I bet in everybody's family, when you think about the different people and the things they did, maybe it was your great grandmother and her outstanding pies that won the fair every time, or your 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 grandfather our grandfather. All right, so our grandfather came to this country when he was a teenager, and he didn't. Well, actually, he did know that our grandmother's uh, uncle was here, and that he could get a job on the farm with our grandmother's uncle or something like that. I don't know.
Some connection.
These family stories often get retold in ways that are new and original. But we'll just say he came knowing of one relative, and that was it. Imagine the courage that it took, right? But then he also had so much hope and faith in himself that, yeah, he could do it. And he did so many different jobs when he was growing up. He told me stories about how I think his first job maybe was when he was something like 4 or 5 years old. He 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 would help his mother cut dried grasses, and they would go to the farmers market and they would sell the dried grasses for people to burn. We all have something in our
Yeah.
family where people have done things, and you could say now, looking back on it, wow, what courage, right? What gumption, what faith, what hope they had. And so I don't know that it's necessarily a trait that's unique to me. I think we all have it in ourselves and in our family histories, but we have to remind ourselves that
Mm,
it's there and that we're
yeah.
able to do it, and just take a chance on ourselves and say, um, if not, why not me? Then it could also be, there's room for me. So
Mm, mm,
maybe,
hmm.
there's room for me in the podcast world. There's
Right.
room for me on the library shelves. And that's just a corollary to the why not me.
Yes. Yeah. I appreciate your encouragement for us to really see and be curious about kind of spotting hope and resilience and tenacity kind of around us. And maybe you are being, I think, you know, oh, it's expressing a worldview and a humility to immediately talk about other people's successes. But, you yourself had to really show that tenacity to get through, law school, to make it to that first
Actually,
book being published.
let me show you. So in Clara, we sprinkled some quotes in here and there, and I love this quote. This is an Albert Einstein quote. It's not that I'm so smart. It's just that I stay with problems longer,
I love
right?
that. That's great.
So I think that yeah, there's a lot to be said for tenacity, and there's a lot to be said for luck. So I was incredibly lucky. It's hard to get your first book sold, but so after receiving a bunch of rejection letters, I decided, I think I need to learn to write for children. That maybe I know how to write legal memos, but maybe I know how to write history papers, but maybe there's something different about writing picture books. And I went to a one day, I had gone to a 1 day seminar on everything you need to know to write and sell a children's book. And there were 8 different speakers there. One of the speakers was Myra Cohn Livingston, and she got up and she started talking about poetry. And I thought, oh no, poetry, because I didn't like poetry. And I'm looking out the window, I'm doodling, I'm not paying attention. And then Myra reads a poem that was just so arresting to me. So it just grabbed my attention. It made me start blinking back tears, just a little poem. And I thought, wow, if that little poem can make me almost cry in public, there is something I can learn from that woman. But I didn't want to learn poetry. So it wasn't until many rejection letters later that I decided,
Mm.
maybe if I learn about rhyme and repetition and rhythm, those poetic devices, then maybe I can write a picture book that will sell. So I signed up for Myra's beginning class in poetry. And the first day of class, we're going around the room. Everyone's introducing themselves with, just like 3 or 4 lines. And I quickly see that these are all repeat students. Myra has a little cult going here with these students who are taking her class over and over and over and who love poetry. And when it came my time to talk, I said, well, I'm not really interested in writing poetry. I want to write picture books. But I think that that knowing poetic devices and techniques will help me write better prose. And they all look at me like, she is so disrespectful. And then later on, when I was talking to Myra, I said, I don't understand why I'm getting all these rejection letters. I think my picture books are really great. I know that there are some picture books in stores, that are worse than my stories. And she said, "You're not ready to be published." And I thought, okay, all right. So I graduated from UCLA. I went to Yale Law School. I was a lawyer, and I'm not ready. I mean, I thought that to myself. Thankfully, I didn't say it. And I said, "How will I know when I'm ready?" And she said, "I will tell you." And I said, "How will you know when I'm ready?" And she said, "Periodically, you may send me your work, and I will look at your work. And if I feel you're ready, I will let you know." And I thought to myself, though I didn't say it, I thought, well, that's not very useful. But then I did send her my work periodically. And very soon after I shared a manuscript with her, she called me up and said, "Guess what I did? I just sold your first book." So I was incredibly lucky. And one of my pieces of advice to people is, when you are looking to make a
Mm,
change or just looking to reach the next level in whatever it is you're doing, make sure you find a mentor. And if you already have a mentor, make sure you reach out to that mentor very often, right? And
mhm,
let that mentor help you. And make sure that you speak honestly about your anxieties, your worries, even your indignations, right? Let that mentor know
mm,
what is going on in your head, because
mm,
otherwise you can't begin to have the productive conversation that will lead to that mentor
mm.
being able to help you. So I was
Yeah.
very, very lucky that
Well,
Myra was willing to fill that role of mentor to me and sold my first
that's
book.
this is true. And like I always flip to other sides of the coin too, where you had to be really open minded. You could have in that moment said, you know what, I didn't even come here to write poetry. I don't really like how you're telling me that you're the sort of like arbiter of who gets published, like, bye bye. But you stayed open and resourceful and took her up on her offer, and it really it worked out. So I think you were lucky, but you also showed what I see as like um I don't know, an openness or resourcefulness.
Well, and people talk about how resilience and grit are super important. Also, just being, uh, ready to shake it off, right? Ready,
Yeah.
being quite ready to shake it off is really important. I remember there was one conversation I had during that year and a half period when I was trying to get published. One conversation that was very discouraging, but thankfully I was able to shake it off. I was talking to someone who was a very well established poet. I told him, "Oh, I'm writing. I want to be a published author." And he looked